In today's video, we're taking a look at some NHL trade rumors focusing on the Arizona Coyotes. According to Elliotte Friedman, they may be selling off some big pieces and going through a rebuild, and we also have a lot more details explaining what happened with their accusations of testing junior age players that were not drafted, which forced them to give up so many draft picks. We'll discuss all the latest coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. Of course, today we're filming an outdoor video here in downtown Fredericton, New Brunswick, down by the water. So I hope you enjoy the scenery. We get a lot of information from Elliotte Friedman's latest 31 Thoughts blog discussing the situation with the Coyotes and all the kind of back details we didn't know before, but what led to their punishment of losing the draft picks after basically being found guilty of doing a lot of testing on junior age hockey players that were not yet drafted outside of the NHL Draft Combine. So let's dive in and get started now. According to this information from Friedman, the first complaint came from the Western Hockey League's Vancouver Giants around January the 22nd. This investigation also came to the conclusion that they would have had testing done with at least 20 other NHL prospects. So clearly there was a lot of this going on. It looks as though the Coyotes had hired a strength and conditioning coach specifically for doing this type of testing. When the NHL talked to the Coyotes about the situation, they referred to several memos which kind of outline the fact that there should be no reason why they wouldn't understand the rules. Of course, Chaka ultimately would be responsible as the head of that department at the time. And obviously rules were not being followed the way they were supposed to be. Now there was also the new coach that was involved with doing a lot of this testing, claimed to have never had seen these memos, but ultimately that really wasn't the NHL's responsibility here. That's the team's responsibility to make sure he's up to speed with all the rules around what can and cannot be done. They also claim that once the NHL informed them of the investigation, that they basically nothing was shared with the remainder of the staff or scouts or anybody else, that ultimately the information was still being collected and that nothing had been done with it at that point in time. Now, the NHL also had rebutted that they didn't entirely believe that. Gary Bettman seemed upset with that response from what Friedman's saying, that essentially some of the complaints indicated that there were scouts present during the testing, not just a strength and conditioning coach. So obviously they kind of believe that to not be true. So that certainly was not a good look here by the Coyotes organization. But they do claim that that data was never distributed, it was never used, it was all deleted. Coyotes were asking, I guess, for the NHL's mercy, that they didn't feel a stiff penalty was really justified, given the fact that even though they might have done wrong, that nothing was really gained from it since the data was never really put to use. But ultimately the NHL did not really feel that way, handing down a pretty stiff penalty where they lost their first round pick in the 2021 NHL Draft. And of course, this year they already have their first round pick traded. They lose their second round pick as part of the punishment as well. And they also had traded their third round pick. So they have no picks in the first 3 rounds of the 2020 NHL Draft. Next year, they have their first rounder gone, and they either have their second or third rounder gone as well. The third rounder was included in the Taylor Hall trade, but could be upgraded to a second if he signs. So either way, they're down 2 picks for sure next year, and it could possibly be the first 2 rounds. So that's pretty stiff punishment. Now, some believe that maybe Chaka was essentially part of the reason why he might have resigned and left the way he did, was to kind of give the NHL an out to not punish the team any further. Obviously, he was the head of the department, so it was essentially on his shoulders at the end of the day here. Even though he did have this other opportunity he wanted to explore in New Jersey, maybe he saw an opportunity to get out before anything further really came from this investigation. That's just my 2 cents. I'm not really sure about that. But clearly, Friedman kind of wonders, though, if Chaka leaving kind of gave him an out to not go harsher on the penalties here. They didn't really feel that, a financial penalty was going to be fair, given the fact that they just got new owners and the owners were not involved at the time when all this took place. Now, Friedman also goes on to note here that the plan for ownership seems to be to cut salary and to go through a rebuild and trade off some of their top assets to recoup some top picks back if they can, obviously. We saw a very different direction recently with Chaka before all this came to be. I mean, the Coyotes were never really completely through a rebuild, but they were certainly much further along. He made some pretty big moves trying to improve things. Acquired Phil Kessel last offseason, acquired Taylor Hall. Things were supposed to be heading in the right direction. They did technically get into the playoffs this year, even though they lost in the first round. They had to get through their play-in series. But obviously, they did make some improvements, even though that wasn't quite to the extent that they were hoping for. But certainly, they had the Coyotes at least in the playoff picture. was a big step in the right direction. Of course, the Arizona Coyotes' two main pieces where they could really recoup some pieces back would be goaltender Darcy Kuemper, who's really been a lifesaver for them. He's come in to really stabilize the goaltending after goalie Antti Raanta, who they acquired a few years ago, has been often injured. He has played well at times. Not that he's not a good goalie, but he's certainly not accountable to be in the lineup night after night, given the fact of how often he seems to get hurt. Obviously, Kuemper has a pretty favorable contract as well, given how well he's played the past year or two. He only has 2 more years left at $4.5 million, so that's certainly going to attract a lot of interest. The Coyotes will not have any trouble moving him if they decide to do so, and obviously to get some picks back would be, preferable based on what Friedman here is saying. Now, of course, one link I'm going to give you here, this is just my personal opinion, but we keep hearing about the fact that the Maple Leafs are exploring a Freddie Andersen trade. I mean, the contract alone would save them a little bit of money, so that would be a good start. Obviously, they're tied up against the cap. It's not a ton of money, and it's only an extra year beyond Andersen, but still, it's a step in the right direction. It gets them a little further down the road, and obviously, Kuemper is still at that right age as well. They could consider even a 1 or 2 year extension beyond that, and he could stabilize their goaltending for some time. Now, of course, the Leafs just got a first-round pick back from Pittsburgh, and that certainly could be one of the main pieces going back to Arizona. They have plenty of other prospects as well. Maybe a Jeremy Bracco, maybe Timothy Liljegren. There's some other pieces that could be thrown in there as well with that first-rounder to make the acquisition. So, of course, Friedman doesn't go on to say that there's a connection there between the Coyotes and the Leafs. That's just me speculating. Obviously, like I said, the Leafs are rumored a lot about Andersen, and Andersen's mentioned in his blog here where he talks about all the Arizona stuff. And obviously, like I said, if they were going to move Andersen, they're only going to do it if they can get an upgrade. Probably ideally save a little bit of money in the process and kind of make sure their goaltending is still pretty stable for the next few years as they try to take things further up a notch here and get into win mode and become more of a Stanley Cup contender. So to me, Darcy Kuemper would be a great fit for the Maple Leafs if they wanted to consider a Freddie Andersen trade. But in that situation, I would think that the Coyotes probably wouldn't want Andersen back if they're going through a rebuild, so it'd have to be another move, as we had mentioned in another video here about Carolina inquiring on Andersen. There'll be plenty of interest in Andersen if the Leafs make it known that they want to consider a trade. So let me know what you think about the Arizona Coyotes. If Darcy Kuemper becomes available, do you not agree that he would have a ton of interest in a team like the Leafs, who are certainly cash-strapped, looking to make some changes, would be a great fit? You also could look to a team like the Edmonton Oilers or the Calgary Flames. They're not going to have a ton of space either, and their goaltending situations also could use a change as well. So there'll be no shortage of interest. I think there'll be a lot of teams lining up to consider making an acquisition of Darcy Kuemper if the Coyotes make it known that he's available. Now, the other big piece in the Coyotes is captain Oliver Ekman-Larsson, and yes, he carries a 7-year contract remaining here. He had an 8-year deal, $8.25 million, 1 year into it, so he still has 7 years left. That's a hefty contract to try to move, and he does have a no-move clause as well, but Friedman notes here in the article that Oliver Ekman-Larsson is open to waiving that clause to be traded. Of course, it largely depends on what the destination is going to be. Certainly, there might be some teams he might waive for, and other teams he may not. But still, he seems open to it, which gives them the opportunity to explore and kind of gauge what the market could give them for a return. Obviously, if you look around, some teams that have a lot of draft picks and prospects would be your ideal candidates, because that's what the Coyotes would be looking to do here, is to restock their picks that they're losing here through this punishment from the testing that they have to forfeit. So if you look to a team like the Montreal Canadiens, who've been rumored for a long time on a left shot D, who would they be able to get out there on the market? I mean, Ekman-Larsen could be a huge piece for them. They have a lot of space. Bergevin has been very good at managing the space. They have a ton of draft picks for this year's 2020 draft and a few for extra for next year. And obviously, they're also have a pretty good prospect pool. So would you take maybe a first-round pick, throw in a prospect, maybe a Ryan Poehling, maybe it's a Cale Fleury? Hard to say who it would be. They have enough of them out there that they could consider making this an offer to the Coyotes. They could even include something else. I mean, I know we talk a lot about Domi being moved. I'm not really sure he'd want to go back to Arizona, because obviously things did not go well for him while he was there. But he doesn't have any trade protection either, so at the same time, you'd have to think that really they could do it technically. But Domi back to the Coyotes for OEL to Montreal would be a crazy scenario. That's just me speculating again. I don't have any rumors to suggest that there's a deal actually being discussed, but just the fact that Domi is a player who's had lots of rumors around him. Hard to say what would happen there, but the Habs would be a team that Ekman-Larsen could go to that could accommodate that trade. That's why I'm suggesting that. You also look into like a team like the Ottawa Senators. They also have a ton of picks. tons of cap space. Even a team like the Los Angeles Kings, for example, are also loaded with picks with a deep prospect pool. Like, they would be the prime candidates for me that would have the right assets that the Coyotes would be looking for if they execute this. But clearly, it looks as though they're definitely gauging the market, what a return would be. He's open to moving, so could we see an Oliver Ekman-Larsson trade sometime before next season? It certainly seems like it's a real possibility here. And if the Coyotes go down this path here and they go through a rebuild, if they don't sign Taylor Hall, they trade Kuemper, they trade Ekman-Larsson, where's this team going to be? They're going to end up bottoming out here. And really, it wasn't that long ago they were near the bottom. They really didn't build themselves up all that far. That's why some people are saying, did they really ever finish rebuilding? And yet they're going here yet again. New ownership, cutting costs. And just to me, that's not good, really, for a franchise who desperately needs to find a new arena and long-term stability and trying to build up that fan base, get more ticket sales when they can do so. So clearly, it's not a good sign for the Coyotes, and I do have to wonder what that means for their long-term future in the desert. So let me know what your thoughts are. Could either of these players be moved? Do you think it makes sense what Friedman's saying, that new ownership here is going to take them through a rebuild, sell off these assets to recoup some picks? Give me your mock trades or where you think they can go down in the comments, and we'll discuss further. If you're new to the channel, consider subscribing and turning on your notifications so you don't miss any future content. And give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. I'd appreciate it if you did. As always, thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.